The air in Oxford was crisp that evening, the sky heavy with grey clouds hanging low over the ancient city. But inside the grand debate hall of the university, the atmosphere was anything but dull. Journalists, professors, students, and thinkers from across the world filled the vast room. The event had been announced weeks ago, and had sold out in minutes. On stage sat 2 chairs, one occupied by Professor David James, the world-renowned atheist biologist and philosopher, a man who had spent his life defending secularism and reason. Opposite him sat Imam Abdurrahman, a humble Islamic cleric from a small village in East Java, Indonesia. Dressed in a simple white robe and turban, he looked entirely out of place next to the sharply dressed academic giant. But his eyes carried a quiet strength, a glow of serenity, as if he were completely at peace despite being in the lion's den. The host stepped forward, his voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Tonight, we witness not just a debate, but a confrontation between reason and revelation, between science and spirituality. May truth shine through." Thunderous applause followed. Professor James leaned over to a nearby committee member and muttered with a smirk, "Let's be quick. I don't like wasting time on fairy tales." His words were sharp, arrogant, but Imam Abdurrahman simply adjusted his turban and smiled, having heard the comment. As both men took their seats and the cameras rolled, a hush fell over the audience. David spoke first, his voice loud and confident. "For over 30 years, I've studied biology and philosophy. Not once have I found a single objective proof of God. Belief in God, in any form, is simply fear-based tradition passed from generation to generation, nothing more." Applause erupted from one side of the room. The other half remained silent, waiting. Imam Abdurrahman leaned toward his microphone and began, his voice calm yet compelling. "I do not come here with dogma. I come with the light of reason given by the All-Knowing. If truth must be proven, then let us search together. If reason is the tool, then let us be honest with our own conscience." There was something disarming in his tone, not confrontational, but sincere. David smirked. "So tell me, Imam, if God exists, where is the proof? I don't see him in the fossils I study or the neurons I map. Nature explains itself." Imam nodded slowly. "Then let me ask, Professor, if nature explains itself, who established the laws of nature? If everything is random, why is logic so consistent? If randomness rules, why does your entire discipline rely on fixed rules?" David hesitated, just for a moment. "The laws of nature are inherent, self-sustaining." "So," the Imam responded gently, "you believe in laws without a lawmaker?" There was a pause. Whispers rippled through the hall. A student in the back nudged his friend. "Did he just corner James already?" David shifted in his seat. "Let's talk science then. You Muslims believe humans came from Adam, created by God. But we know, scientifically, humans evolved from ancient hominids. Fossils don't lie." Imam closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. "You believe in evolution because of fossil evidence. But that evidence is incomplete, fragments interpreted through assumptions. Could it be possible, Professor, that science, when incomplete, sometimes reaches incomplete conclusions?" David replied confidently. "It's not just a theory. It's the foundation of modern biology. I do not deny that species change over time," said the Imam. "But I reject the idea that man came from lower animals. The Qur'an says in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 30, "Indeed, I will place upon the earth a vicegerent." That vicegerent was Adam, not a creature evolving from apes." David grinned. "You realize humans and chimpanzees share 98% of DNA, right? That's not coincidence. And humans share 60% of their DNA with bananas," Imam replied smoothly. "Are we cousins of bananas too? Similarity in structure does not prove shared origin. It could just as easily suggest a single, consistent designer." The audience went silent. Even those who were skeptical leaned forward now. David quickly shifted the topic. "Fine. Let's talk cosmology. You believe God created the heavens and the earth. But the Big Bang explains everything. We don't need a divine creator. Imam smiled. Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 30, do not the disbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were joined together, and we split them apart? That verse existed 1,400 years ago. Does it not echo the very concept of the Big Bang? David scoffed. A lucky guess. Imam tilted his head. One verse might be luck. Two is still coincidence. But when dozens of verses speak of embryology, tectonic plates, the expansion of the universe, the formation of clouds, the separation of oceans, are they all coincidences? Murmurs rippled through the audience. A professor in the front row began taking notes. David crossed his arms. Even if the Qur'an says these things, that's not scientific evidence. It's still a book written by men. But the scientific method itself is limited by human perception, the Imam replied. Why reject revelation that fills the gaps science cannot reach? David raised an eyebrow. So now religion is just a way to fill ignorance? No, Imam said. It's the completion of knowledge. Science explains how. Revelation explains why. For the first time, David James leaned back, his grin fading slightly. The audience could sense the shift. This wasn't just a villager. This was a scholar, grounded, logical, and deeply spiritual. David cleared his throat. Let's talk about morality then. Religion claims monopoly over morals. But I can be good without religion. I don't need heaven or hell to tell me not to kill or steal. I do not doubt that humans can recognize right from wrong, said the Imam. But if morality is just social consensus, then it changes with time and place. What if a society agrees that killing a child is acceptable? Does that make it right? David looked away for a split second. Morals rooted in divine guidance, Imam continued, do not shift with time or power. The Qur'an says, and indeed, we have honored the children of Adam. That's a universal standard. The audience fell into complete silence. Even those who had come to cheer for Professor James were now listening with open hearts. David forced a smile. So, without God, you think humans are just animals? No, said Imam gently. Without God, humans lose direction. Like a ship without a compass. Intelligent but lost. The tension in the room was now palpable. A student near the front whispered, he's not preaching, he's proving. The professor's confidence was beginning to crack. His face turned slightly red, and he glanced at his watch, then at the crowd. Let's continue, he said firmly. The debate was far from over. But already, the crowd had seen something unexpected, a man with no flashy credentials, no lab coat, no Oxford education, holding his ground against a giant of logic and science. And doing it not with rage, but with calm, humility, and piercing clarity. This was no ordinary night. And the journey was just beginning. The moderator gave a brief nod, signaling that the next segment had begun. The audience remained glued to their seats, with some leaning forward, notebooks open, pens hovering over the page. Cameras panned slowly across the room, catching the focused expressions of renowned scholars and students alike. For many, this was no longer just a debate. It had become a spectacle of ideas and ego, truth and pride. Professor David James, though still poised, now carried a stiffness in his shoulders. He leaned into the microphone and raised his voice a notch. Let's go deeper. You say God is the source of moral authority. Yet history is full of people doing horrible things in His name, wars, oppression, even genocide. Are you saying God sanctioned that? Imam Abdurrahman blinked slowly, then replied with unwavering calm. No, Professor. That is the misuse of God's name, not the command of God Himself. People have hijacked religion just as people have hijacked science, to justify power and violence. But the abuse of something does not disprove its truth. David responded. And yet how do we know whose interpretation of God is correct? There are thousands of religions. Why should we believe yours? The Imam looked straight at David. Because Islam does not demand blind faith. It invites you to reason. It gives verifiable clues, scientific, historical, and moral, that align with reality. Islam doesn't ask you to believe because your parents did. It asks you to think, reflect, and ask. Even so, David said, tapping the table, you can't just point to verses and call it proof. That's not empirical evidence. Imam Abdurrahman nodded. Let's use your standard then. The cosmological argument: everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe had a beginning. This is widely accepted in modern cosmology. Therefore, it must have a cause. That cause must be outside time, space, and matter. This cause is what we call God. David smirked. That's a hypothesis. Quantum theory suggests the universe could emerge from a vacuum. And who created the quantum laws? Imam asked softly. Did the rules write themselves? Did logic arise from chaos? A few professors in the audience nodded subtly. David opened his mouth but didn't respond immediately. Instead, he changed the direction again. Fine. Let's suppose God exists. Then why all the suffering? Why would an all-loving God allow children to die from hunger or people to be born with diseases? Imam's face softened. Because this life is a test, not a paradise. The Qur'an says, He who created death and life to test which of you is best in deeds. Suffering awakens empathy, builds patience, and exposes the soul. If there were no trials, humans would never grow. But why test us? David pressed. Is God insecure? Why does he need our worship? Imam shook his head. God needs nothing. He is independent. It is we who need him. Just as a tree needs the sun, not because the sun benefits, but because the tree would die without it. The crowd absorbed this quietly. For a long time, no one spoke. Then David leaned forward again. Let's talk about death. You claim there's life after death. But nobody has come back to confirm that. It's just stories. Is everything unseen false? Imam asked. Do you see gravity? Love? Consciousness? Yet we believe in them because their effects are real. Similarly, the soul is invisible, but the conscience it carries is unmistakable. David narrowed his eyes. But what happens after we die? Imam replied solemnly. We return to the one who made us. The Qur'an says, does man think that we will not gather his bones? Yes, we are even able to reconstruct his fingertips. If the Creator made us from nothing, is reassembling us difficult? David chuckled sarcastically. That's faith. Not science. It is truth, the Imam said, his voice firmer now. You live once, yes. But what if you're wrong, Professor? What if this life is a test and there's accountability after death? David leaned back, finally rattled. And what if you're wrong? Then I lose nothing, Imam replied. I lived a moral life, helped others, prayed, and showed kindness. But if you're wrong, you lose everything. That's Pascal's wager, not just a gamble, but a choice of infinite risk. The room stirred. A few students looked at one another. One even whispered, He has a point. David checked his watch again, more from nervousness than necessity. So you scare people into religion by threatening them with hell? No, the Imam said. We guide them with truth and mercy. Islam is not a faith of fear, it is a faith of balance. It speaks of paradise more than hell, and hope more than punishment. David was visibly agitated now. His cheeks reddened, his fingers drummed anxiously. But I don't need religion to be moral. I can be kind, generous, and fair without divine commandments. Imam paused. How long will that goodness last when power offers you no accountability? What will hold you back when the world celebrates evil masked as progress? David stood abruptly. I don't need fear to be ethical, he shouted. Then why did you raise your voice? The Imam asked gently. That question hit hard. David froze for a second. Because I'm passionate. Or perhaps disturbed? The Imam asked. The room fell eerily quiet. David sat down again, slower this time. The moderator tried to intervene, but Imam raised his hand and continued. You say morality is relative, defined by social evolution. But if that's true, then slavery was once moral. Genocide was legal. Are we to accept that morality is whatever society approves? David didn't respond. True morality must be anchored, said the Imam. And the Qur'an says, we have honored the children of Adam. Not because of race, status, or intellect, but because they are human. Without God, dignity becomes negotiable. The tension in the hall was no longer combative. It was contemplative. David rubbed his forehead. You think I'm just an arrogant man blinded by science, don't you? No, Professor, the Imam said with warmth. I see a man searching, loudly perhaps, but sincerely. A long silence passed. David looked down at his notes, but didn't read them. Finally, he said, So what do you propose? That I just abandon everything I believe? My identity? My years of study? No, said Imam. I ask you only to consider, if there is a greater truth than what you hold, would you be willing to embrace it? The one who seeks truth must be ready to follow it wherever it leads. David's lips tightened, but he said nothing. In the back of the hall, a student whispered, He's shaking. A camera zoomed in. David's hands were trembling slightly. He cleared his throat. I'm not convinced yet. But I feel something I can't explain. That's not weakness, said the Imam. That's your fitra, your inner nature, responding to the truth. David stood again, slower this time, more hesitant. Let's continue tomorrow, he said, almost whispering. I need time to think. And with that, the lights dimmed. The moderator announced a break. But no one moved. Because everyone knew this debate was no longer just about ideas. It was about something much deeper, a man standing on the edge of spiritual awakening. The next day, Oxford's ancient halls buzzed with unprecedented anticipation. News of the previous night's debate had already gone viral. Video clips circulated across social media. One showed Imam Abdurrahman calmly countering the theory of evolution, another featured Professor David James falling uncharacteristically silent after being asked about the foundation of morality. The hashtags #OxfordDebate and #TruthBeyondScience were trending worldwide. When the doors to the hall opened for the second session, the crowd surged in like a wave. Every seat was occupied, even the aisles packed with people sitting cross-legged. Professors who had once scoffed at religion now arrived early with notebooks in hand. Many attendees had brought their families, friends, even priests and monks. Something powerful was unfolding, and nobody wanted to miss what might come next. Professor David James arrived in a navy blazer, his face pale, hair slightly tousled. He looked less like the confident atheist champion from the day before and more like a man who had spent the night in deep internal battle. Imam Abdurrahman entered quietly from the side, dressed just as simply as before. His white robe and turban still uncreased, his face still serene. The moment both men were seated, the moderator gave a small nod. The microphone crackled to life. David leaned in, his voice softer than expected. Before we begin, he said, I want to address something. Last night I was unsettled. Not because I was defeated in debate, I've been challenged before, but because I felt something inside me resisting, breaking, questioning everything I thought was solid. A hush fell over the room. I don't know what it was, he continued. But it made me realize that for all my talk of logic and evidence, there are corners of life I've never dared to examine, corners where reason ends and something else begins. Imam Abdurrahman listened without a word, his hands resting gently on his lap. So, David said, straightening, today I won't just attack. I'll ask. And I expect answers not only for my sake, but for the thousands watching who carry the same doubts. Imam nodded. Ask, Professor. David inhaled deeply. What makes you so sure that Islam is the truth? How do you know that your path is the right one? Isn't it just cultural conditioning? No, Imam replied. Because I questioned it myself. I explored others. But Islam is the only faith that not only asks you to believe, but gives you reasons. It speaks to the mind and the soul. It challenges and embraces both. He opened a small Qur'an on the desk in front of him and turned a page. Surah Al-Anbiya verse 30, do the disbelievers not see that the heavens and the earth were once a joined entity, then we separated them? This resembles the Big Bang Theory, not symbolically, but precisely. How could a desert man 1,400 years ago know this? David nodded slowly. I've read that verse. I thought it was poetic coincidence. Imam smiled. One verse might be coincidence. But how about embryology? The Qur'an describes the embryo as a clinging clot, a term only modern microscopes could confirm. Or the fact that the seas don't mix due to a barrier, mentioned in Surah Ar-Rahman. The layering of the atmosphere. The movement of mountains. All documented in a book from a man who could not read or write. David looked away for a moment, gripping the edge of his podium. The Qur'an, Imam continued, is not a science textbook. But it contains signs, ayat, that science later uncovers. That's not magic. That's divine knowledge. David swallowed. Still, I struggle. If God is merciful, why did he let me live 57 years in arrogance? Why didn't he intervene earlier? Because God never forces belief, Imam replied. Faith earned by coercion is not real. He sends signs, messages, moments, but he waits. Until your heart is ready. And maybe, he added softly, that time is now. Silence. David looked up, and his eyes shone, not with tears, but with a flicker of something deeper. Something ancient. He stepped forward. So if I wanted to return, to explore this faith, would I still be welcomed? Even after all I've said? Imam stood slowly, walked toward David, and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. God is closer to you than your jugular vein, he said. He has been waiting for you since the beginning. The audience sat motionless, breaths held. David's voice quivered. Then tell me what to do. Begin by bearing witness, Imam said. Say after me. Slowly. Clearly. The hall was pin-drop silent. I bear witness, David repeated. That there is no God but Allah. That there is no God but Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Tears streamed down David's face. The man who once debated religion with steel logic had now been softened, not by fear, but by truth. The hall erupted. Some wept openly, others raised their hands in prayer. A few fell in sujud, thanking the one who guides whom he wills. A committee member rushed to the stage to embrace him. Cameras zoomed in as David, now dud, smiled through tears, his face no longer tight with pride, but bright with peace. When the crowd calmed, Dud turned to Imam and asked, Will I be able to learn more? Will you teach me? I will, Imam said. But the real teacher is the Qur'an. And the one who wrote it. In that moment, Oxford witnessed not just a conversion, but a rebirth. A man reborn not through pressure, but through understanding. A soul that had wandered long in the desert of doubt, finally finding an oasis. What came next wasn't applause. It was takbir, soft at first, then louder. Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! That night, a spark lit across the intellectual world, not to start a fire of division, but to illuminate a path for all who seek the truth, no matter how far they've strayed. As the takbir faded into silence, the atmosphere in the Oxford Hall was unlike anything ever witnessed in its long history. Where there had once been academic skepticism and intellectual arrogance, now there was a quiet awe, a humbling realization that something beyond words had just taken place. Professor David James, a man once known for tearing down religious arguments with surgical precision, had submitted to the very truth he once mocked. And he did not do so in defeat, but in clarity. He did not stumble under pressure. He rose with peace. A small group of students made their way to the front of the hall, eyes wet with emotion. A young man wearing a Cambridge hoodie whispered, I came here to watch a man destroy religion. But I'm leaving with the urge to open a Qur'an. A hijabi girl in the back wiped her tears and turned to her friend. This is not just history. It's a reminder that guidance can reach anyone, even those who never sought it. David, now dud, remained seated beside Imam Abdurrahman, overwhelmed yet tranquil. He turned toward him and whispered, "For the first time in decades, I feel weightless. I spent my whole life chasing certainty through microscopes and experiments, but this is the first time I've felt truth without anxiety." Imam simply nodded, placing his hand gently on Dud's shoulder. "Allah does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. He brought you to this moment when your heart was ready. Never too soon. Never too late." Meanwhile, the organizers were flooded with media requests. Journalists rushed outside to file breaking news stories. The words, "Professor David James converts to Islam," appeared within minutes on international news websites. Debate highlights were posted online in real time, watched by millions around the world. The moment he recited the Shahada became the most viewed academic clip in modern history. What shocked people even more than the conversion was the humility in it. There had been no spectacle. No dramatic breakdown. Only a sincere man quietly surrendering to the truth he could no longer deny. In the days that followed, Dud became the topic of discussion across television panels, university forums, and podcast interviews. People from every ideological background, atheists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Jews, discussed his transformation. Was it genuine? Was it emotional manipulation? Or was it simply the undeniable magnetism of divine truth? Dud chose not to speak to the media for several days. Instead, he remained in Oxford and requested to spend time at the small prayer room in the Islamic center nearby. He wanted to pray. To learn how to bow. To understand wudu. To know how to pronounce Surah al-Fatiha with clarity and love. Meanwhile, Imam Abdurrahman politely declined all interview requests. When asked why, he responded simply, "I didn't come for fame. I came for Dawah. The story is not about me, it's about Allah's guidance." Still, the world insisted on learning more about the man who had managed to dismantle decades of intellectual resistance with nothing more than calm arguments, gentle logic, and unwavering faith. Soon, videos of the full debate were translated into dozens of languages. Comment sections overflowed with confessions and questions. Some read, "I never took Islam seriously. But this debate changed everything for me. I'm an agnostic scientist. And I must admit, this Imam's arguments are not only logical, they're deeply human. I've never cried watching a debate before. I did today." Even more astounding was what followed. Across Europe and America, Islamic centers reported a sudden surge of visitors. Libraries witnessed an unusual increase in requests for the Qur'an and Islamic philosophy books. A prominent bookstore in New York sold out all copies of Maurice Bucaille's The Bible, the Qur'an and Science within hours. On social media, people started sharing clips from the debate with hashtags like #DudReturns, #OxfordTruth, and #ImamLogic. But Dud had no interest in being idolized. One evening, just 5 days after the debate, he held a private gathering at the Oxford University Islamic Society. There, surrounded by Muslim students from various countries, he spoke humbly. "I didn't come to Islam to become a symbol. I came because I saw myself in a mirror for the first time. And I realized that for all my achievements, I was incomplete." He paused. "I was living for proof. Now I live with purpose." Students in the room broke down. A Chinese student from Beijing stood up and asked, "Professor, how do we stay firm in our faith in environments that mock belief?" Dud replied, "You don't respond with fire. You respond with light. Just like Imam did. He didn't attack me. He didn't belittle my arrogance. He illuminated my ignorance." Word of this speech spread quickly. Within a week, Dud was invited to speak at universities in Germany, the United States, Indonesia, and even Japan. Though he accepted a few invitations, he insisted on something surprising. "I don't want to debate anymore. I want to listen now." Meanwhile, in Indonesia, Imam Abdurrahman returned to his pesantren, Islamic boarding school, in East Java. The villagers greeted him with joy and admiration. But the Imam remained as humble as ever, refusing praise. "It was Allah who softened his heart," he said. I was merely a rope in his hand. But even there, the ripple effects were evident. Foreign students began arriving at the Pesantren. Some were scholars, some ordinary seekers. They came not to convert immediately, but to understand. They came curious, and most left transformed. The Indonesian government even extended an invitation for Imam Abdurrahman to lead an interfaith council. He politely declined, saying, "My job is to teach the farmer's son and the orphan girl. That is enough honor for me." As for Dud, he officially resigned from his professorship a month later. The letter he submitted stunned the faculty. It read, "I leave not because I reject science, but because I now understand its limits. I used to think science could answer every question. But it cannot answer the ache in a lonely heart, the meaning behind suffering, or the origin of love. For that, I have turned to the one who answers without a microscope." But he did not disappear into isolation. Instead, he began writing a book, From Atheist to Abdurrahman, A Journey of Mind and Heart. In it, he documented every step of his intellectual evolution, every logical knot he had to untie, and every spiritual moment that brought him closer to Allah. Imam Abdurrahman, upon hearing about the book, smiled. "He has become a Dai now," he told his students. "And sometimes, a former enemy of truth becomes its strongest defender." And so, the man who had once lectured the world against God now spoke of him with awe. He wasn't preaching. He was witnessing. And his witness became the spark for a quiet revolution. Winter had begun to settle over Oxford, casting long shadows over its stone courtyards and ivy-covered walls. Yet inside the minds of many students and scholars, a new light had taken root, a light that came not from electric bulbs or microscopes, but from within. And at the heart of that awakening stood two men from completely different worlds. Dud, formerly Professor David James, the atheist scientist who had once lectured the world on materialism, and Imam Abdurrahman, the humble Islamic cleric from East Java who had defeated him not with pride, but with patience. Dud spent most of his mornings in quiet reflection now, often found in the prayer room at the Islamic Center. He practiced his salah slowly, relearning how to move his body in worship, how to whisper Subhana Rabbil Azim with sincerity, how to weep not from stress but from gratitude. And each time he placed his forehead on the ground, a lifetime of arrogance drained away. He had changed his clothes too. No longer did he wear sharp suits or academic robes. Instead, he chose simplicity, loose trousers, a collared tunic, and occasionally, a light kufi cap. He still kept his books, but now the Qur'an sat on top of his shelf. One morning, a knock echoed softly on his office door. "Come in," Dud said, closing the Qur'an gently. A familiar figure entered. It was Professor Elena Stone, a renowned evolutionary biologist, and one of Dud's oldest colleagues. She stared at him for a moment before speaking. "I thought it was a joke," she said flatly. "When I heard the news." Dud offered a gentle smile. "It's not." She stepped inside, sitting down without being asked. "You really left everything, for religion?" "I didn't leave everything," he replied. "I found something." She looked at him carefully. "You were the most rational man I knew. You taught me that belief was a crutch. And now, you're reciting Arabic and praying 5 times a day?" Dud took a slow breath. "I haven't abandoned rationality. I've expanded it. I've accepted that truth is not limited to what can be measured. There are truths the microscope cannot show. Love. Purpose. The soul." Elena frowned. "But don't you think you were manipulated? That Imam used clever emotional tactics?" Dud shook his head. "He didn't manipulate me. He liberated me. He reminded me that intelligence without humility becomes self-worship. That was my disease. Not science, but pride." For a moment, Elena said nothing. Then her eyes softened. "You seem lighter." "I am," he said. Later that afternoon, Dud visited Imam Abdurrahman, who had delayed his return to Indonesia for a few more days due to overwhelming requests from universities, media outlets, and religious organizations. But he had accepted only one visitor that day, Dud. They sat together on a bench outside the prayer hall, watching students walk by. I spoke to Elena this morning, Dud said. And? Asked the Imam. She was skeptical. But I think she's curious. The Imam smiled. Curiosity is the first mercy. They sat in silence for a while. I've been thinking, Dud said at last. Why was it that all my life, I mocked believers? I called them weak, naive. And yet here I am, seeking what they had all along. Imam looked at him gently. Because the ego resists surrender. It confuses strength with control. But true strength is not in dominating others, it's in conquering the self. Dud nodded. I used to think submission was weakness. But Islam means submission, Imam replied. Not in defeat, but in alignment. Like a river surrendering to gravity, by flowing, it finds its course. Dud leaned forward, rubbing his palms together. I want to make amends. You already have, Imam said. No, I mean, I've hurt people. Mocked faith. Dismissed the sincere. I need to speak to the world, not to defend myself, but to defend the truth I once rejected. The Imam paused. Then speak, Dud. But speak not to be heard. Speak to awaken. And so, within weeks, Dud delivered his first public lecture, not in a mosque, not at a conference, but in the very same Oxford lecture hall where he had once ridiculed religion. The title of the event was simple. From Certainty to Surrender, My Journey from Atheism to Islam. Hundreds attended. Some came out of support. Others came in disbelief, still thinking it was a publicity stunt. Some hoped to debate him. Others hoped to witness another miracle. He stepped up to the podium wearing a soft gray tunic and no tie. He looked around the room, his eyes steady. I once stood here, he began, and made people laugh at religion. I called God an illusion. I described believers as weak minds clinging to myths. And I was wrong. He paused, letting the silence settle. I was wrong not because I lacked intelligence, but because I lacked humility. I thought that truth had to be squeezed through a laboratory lens. I dismissed anything I couldn't dissect. But truth, real truth, requires more than analysis. It requires surrender. A murmur moved through the crowd. I found that in Islam, he continued. Not because someone forced me. Not because I was broken. But because when I finally opened the door to my heart, I realized the truth had been knocking for years. In the front row, Elena sat unmoving, her fingers gripping her notebook. Around her, several professors watched in stunned silence. I still believe in science, Dud said. I still teach evolution, biology, neuroscience. But I now understand their limits. Science is a map. Religion is the compass. He smiled. And Islam is the North Star. The audience fell silent. Then, unexpectedly, a hand rose. A student stood. If everything you say is true, he asked, then what kept you from the truth for so long? Dud answered without hesitation. My own arrogance. The room was still. Then the applause began, slow at first, then louder. But Dud didn't smile out of pride. He smiled out of relief. A man unburdened. After the lecture, dozens approached him. Some to congratulate, some to argue, and some, surprisingly, to ask about Islam. Elena approached him last. I still don't believe in God, she said, but I believe in your sincerity. He nodded. That's a start. And as she walked away, she glanced back once, eyes filled with thoughts she couldn't yet name. Back at the mosque that night, Dud stood beside Imam Abdurrahman for Isha prayer. As they bowed, prostrated, and sat in tashahhud, he felt something profound, more than peace. It was conviction. After prayer, he turned to the Imam. When are you going back to Java? Tomorrow, the Imam smiled. The rice fields are waiting. And so are my students. Dud nodded. I want to visit. Learn more. See where this wisdom came from. The Imam laughed softly. It did not come from me, Dud. It came from Allah. Dud lowered his head. But he sent it through you. And that night, as they sat together under the stars, drinking tea and reciting verses from the Qur'an, both men knew that what had happened in Oxford would not remain in Oxford. It had already begun to ripple through the hearts of seekers everywhere. The morning sun rose gently over East Java, casting golden rays upon the rice paddies that glistened with dew. Birds chirped softly, and a gentle breeze swept across the small village of Tegorejo, home to the modest Pazantran, Islamic boarding school, where Imam Abdurrahman had quietly served for decades. It was a place untouched by the chaos of the outside world, no bright lights, no fast cars, only children reciting Qur'an under bamboo roofs and farmers offering silent prayers as they tilled the land. And now, for the first time in its history, this tranquil village was welcoming a very unexpected guest, Dud, formerly known as Professor David James, the Oxford academic whose conversion had stunned the world. When the word spread that Dud was coming, the entire village prepared, not with red carpets or parades, but with sincerity. The children cleaned the school grounds. Women prepared traditional dishes. Men decorated the small mosque entrance with flowers. Yet everyone knew, most of all, that Imam Abdurrahman had asked for no ceremony. "He's coming not as a professor," he reminded them, "but as a brother in faith." Dud arrived with only a small backpack and a folded prayer rug. He wore a loose white tunic and a black sankok, his eyes reflecting both excitement and reverence. A handful of villagers stood shyly by as he stepped out of the small van that had brought him from the city. He looked around at the fields, the modest homes, the small mosque with its green dome, and whispered to himself, "This is where truth came from, not from ivory towers, but from humble soil." Imam Abdurrahman was waiting for him at the entrance of the Pazantran, his smile wide and warm. They embraced like family. "You've come far," said the Imam. "And still not far enough," Dud replied with a grin. They walked slowly into the courtyard. Young students peeked out from classrooms, whispering excitedly, many unable to believe that the man from the videos, the famous professor who had debated their teacher, was now walking in their village, barefoot. Dud spent his first few days in Tegorejo not teaching, but learning. He sat on the floor with teenagers to revise basic Arabic. He practiced memorizing short surahs. He helped clean the mosque. He ate rice with his hands and drank sweet tea in clay cups. No one treated him like a celebrity, and that, he later confessed, was the greatest gift. "I spent most of my life thinking I was important," he said one night to a circle of students. "But it is only now, sitting with you, wiping mosque floors, that I feel like a real human being." One boy asked shyly, "Sir, can a man truly change?" Dud smiled. "I was a man who mocked prayer. And now, my soul depends on it. So yes, a man can change." Each evening, Dud would sit quietly next to the Imam on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, listening to the sound of the call to prayer echo through the air. They spoke less and listened more, to the birds, to the wind, to the quiet stirrings of the heart. One evening Imam turned to Dud. "You have found Islam in the West. But now you must learn how it lives in the East. We have fewer books, but more barakah." Dud nodded. "I want to know it all, not just the logic, but the love. Not just the rulings, but the Ruh spirit." Imam then took him to visit villagers. A man who had lost his child but still smiled in prayer. An old woman who had been blind for years but recited Qur'an by heart. A teenager who gave away his only pair of sandals to someone poorer than him. "These," Imam whispered, "are the verses not written on paper, but lived in flesh." Dud watched. Listened. Cried. "I spent years debating," he told a group one evening. "But I never truly understood Islam. It's not a theory. It's a way of breathing, of walking, of sleeping, of forgiving. It's the Qur'an in your hands and in your heart." One day, he asked Imam a question that had long haunted him. "Why me?" The Imam looked up from his tea. "Why what? Why did Allah guide me? Why would He care about someone who spent most of his life mocking Him?" Imam paused. "Because you were sincere in your search, even when you didn't know it. And because Allah guides whom He wills, not because of our worth, but because of his mercy. Dud nodded slowly. It terrifies me, how close I was to dying without knowing him. That's not terror, Imam said. That's awakening. That's love. That night, Dud prayed tahajjud for the first time in his life. Alone in the small mosque, he wept in sujud, sobbing into the carpet, overwhelmed by gratitude. He whispered, Ya Allah, I do not deserve this light. But don't take it away. And somewhere in the silence, he felt a presence, not a voice, not a vision, but a stillness. A confirmation. He was not alone. News of Dud's visit spread quietly across Indonesia. But he requested privacy. I'm not here for publicity, he said. I'm here to be rebuilt. Still, some scholars and youth groups begged for a chance to meet him. After some hesitation, Dud agreed to speak at a local Islamic university. In a packed auditorium, he spoke in simple English, translated by a young student into Bahasa Indonesia. I once held the world in my hands, he said. Degrees, titles, books, recognition. But none of it fed my soul. I was starving with a full plate. Until Islam came, quietly, gently, and fed me from the inside. He paused. I am not perfect. I still struggle. I still learn. But now I have direction. And direction is everything. The hall was silent. Then a student stood and asked, Sir, what is your goal now? Dud smiled. To die as a Muslim, he replied. And to help others see the light before they reach the darkness of the grave. Later, as he walked outside, a little girl ran up to him and gave him a flower. Terima kasih, Pak Dud, she said. Thank you for coming. He knelt down and kissed her forehead. Thank you, he whispered. You remind me what this is all for. When he returned to the pesantren, he sat again with Imam Abdurrahman under the stars. You've done something the world never expected, Imam said. But now the real journey begins. Holding on to the truth is harder than discovering it. I'm ready, Dud replied. Imam smiled. Then it's time for your next step. You've seen the heart of Islam. Now carry it back to the world. Dud looked out at the moonlit fields, hand resting over his chest where a Qur'an now lived in memory and meaning. Yes, he said. With Allah's help I will. Weeks passed since Dud had stepped into the serene world of Tegorejo, and his transformation deepened with every call to prayer. He had not only changed his faith, but his very rhythm of life. No longer driven by academic accolades or media attention, Dud now woke before dawn for tahajjud, cleaned the mosque courtyard alongside teenage students, and listened to the Qur'an not as a literary curiosity, but as divine guidance. He felt himself growing, not just intellectually, but spiritually, emotionally, and inwardly. But the time had come to return. Imam Abdurrahman walked him to the edge of the village early one morning, their sandals pressing softly against the wet grass. The air was cool, and the rising sun painted the sky in soft orange and gold. A small van stood waiting to take Dud back to the city, then eventually to the airport. As they neared the vehicle, Dud paused. I'm afraid, he admitted. Imam turned. Of what? That the noise of the world will drown this peace. That I will forget what I felt here. The Imam placed both hands on Dud's shoulders. Then carry this place inside you. The noise outside cannot silence a heart that remembers Allah. They embraced. And just before Dud climbed into the van, Imam said one last thing. Remember, you were guided for a reason. Don't let your story stay buried in the rice fields. Let it echo where it is most needed. Dud nodded. I will, inshallah. Back in the UK, Dud returned not to Oxford, but to a small flat in Birmingham, where he had chosen to live near a vibrant Muslim community. He was done with the world of academic elitism, done with philosophical clubs that debated meaning but never practiced it. He wanted to live among those who prayed, who struggled, who served. But news of his return spread fast. Journalists camped outside his apartment. Book publishers offered him seven-figure deals. International conferences sent invitations. A leading secular magazine asked him to do a reverse deconstruction, peace. But Dud refused all commercial offers. He turned down talk shows and best-selling contracts. Instead, he started a YouTube channel. Not for fame, but for Dawah. The first video he uploaded was titled, "From Arrogance to Allah, My Journey." In it, he sat in front of a plain wall. No graphics. No dramatic music. Just his face, sincere and calm. "I'm not here to convert you," he began. "I'm here to share how I was transformed by a truth that I had rejected all my life." He told the story, not for spectacle, but for reflection. He spoke of the Oxford debate, of the questions that had haunted him, of the logic that could no longer deny the Creator. He spoke of Imam Abdurrahman, of the rice fields, the children's laughter, the nights of Qur'an under the stars. And finally he said, "I was once David James, a professor of evolution, a destroyer of faith. Now I am Dud, a servant of Allah. And I want to tell you, the peace you're looking for isn't in another theory. It's in submission." The video went viral. Not because it was controversial, but because it was honest. Comments flooded in from atheists, Christians, agnostics, and Muslims alike. "I never understood why people believed in God. But this man, he made me feel it. I cried. I'm not even Muslim. But I cried. As a fellow academic, I relate to the arrogance. Thank you, Dud, for humbling me." Within a month, Dud had over 1 million subscribers. But he never monetized the channel. He never asked for donations. He only asked one thing at the end of each video. Please read the Qur'an. Just once. With an open heart. He began producing a series called The Qur'an for the Rational Mind, where he explained verses not just with tafsir, but with relevance to the modern world. He addressed topics like evolution, morality, justice, suffering, and the soul, always starting with logic and ending with faith. And then something amazing happened. People started taking Shahida. First, a philosophy student from Spain. Then a doctor in California. Then a software engineer in Tokyo. All of them said the same thing. I found Islam through Dud's sincerity. Dud began receiving messages by the hundreds. Not all were kind. Some accused him of being a traitor to reason. Others called him a coward manipulated by emotion. But he never responded with anger. Instead, he replied to even the harshest critics with calm words. I understand your skepticism, he wrote once. I lived in it for 57 years. Eventually, major networks could no longer ignore him. BBC and Al Jazeera invited him for interviews. This time, he accepted, on one condition. I will only come, he said, if I can speak freely about Allah. On live television, he sat in front of the nation and was asked, You were once a man of science. Why submit to religion? And he answered, Because true science leads to the awe of the Creator. The universe is not random, it's a signature. And I finally saw who signed it. The room went silent. A week later, The Guardian ran a front-page headline. Dud, the professor who found God. But Dud didn't care for headlines. He was working on something greater. He began writing a book, not an autobiography, but a guide for those walking the same intellectual path he once did. It was titled, The Rational Path to Islam. In it, he carefully laid out the questions he used to ask, and how Islam answered them, not through dogma, but through timeless reason, science-aligned revelation, and moral truth. He dedicated the book to Imam Abdurrahman, who shone a light where I only saw darkness. Back in East Java, the Imam received a handwritten copy. He smiled and said only one sentence to his students. Now Dud is doing what I hoped, spreading light with words that heal instead of harm. As Ramadan approached, Dud posted a new video. He appeared with a small iftar plate, a date in hand. I used to mock Muslims who fasted, he said. Now I fast with joy. Because hunger taught me what fullness never could. And with that video, over 50,000 people joined him in fasting, even non-Muslims. Some out of curiosity. Some out of solidarity. But many, out of something deeper. Out of a feeling they couldn't name, but Dud had. Guidance. By the time he'd arrived, over 200 people had taken Shaida through his online work alone. And Dud, in turn, had grown, not just as a Muslim, but as a beacon of what a transformed soul looks like. He no longer needed stages, debates, or applause. He had Allah. And he had a mission. To keep telling his story. Not because he was the hero. But because in his defeat, he had discovered the greatest victory. And in a world drowning in confusion, noise, and pride, Dud stood tall, not as a man of titles, but as a man of Tawheed. And wherever his voice echoed, from village mosques in Java to lecture halls in Europe, he reminded the world. Truth is not always found in proving. Sometimes it's found in submitting. And in that submission there is peace. A Muslim girl stunned the entire debate hall. When she silenced an atheist with nothing but a mirror. One simple mirror logic, and every argument fell apart. The debate hall was dimly lit. 2 microphones stood at the front of the stage. One of them was occupied by a young atheist, calm, confident, with a faint smirk that hinted he expected to win. "We don't need religion to live a clean life," he said smoothly. "Reason is enough." The room fell silent. Then, a soft voice echoed from the side. A Muslim girl stepped forward slowly. In her hand, she carried something unusual, a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. The audience shifted in their seats. The atheist chuckled. "What's that supposed to prove?" She calmly opened the cap and gently applied the paste to the brush. Holding it up, she said, "Every morning, we brush our teeth, to remove what's foul, to look presentable, to avoid offending others." She paused, looking directly at him. "But when was the last time we cleaned our intentions, our words, or our hearts? You've learned how to clean your mouth. But have you ever thought about cleaning your soul?" A hush fell over the crowd. The atheist's smirk faded. His eyes locked with hers. And for the first time, he had nothing to say. A moment of stillness lingered after the previous exchange. The audience was quiet, yet hungry for more. The atheist regained his composure. "Religion only teaches fear and restraint," he said casually, pacing a few steps. "Why not just follow human instinct?" Before anyone could respond, the Muslim girl stepped forward again, this time holding a small porcelain teacup filled with steaming hot tea. The steam rose gently, visible even under the soft stage lights. She smiled, lifted the cup carefully, and said, "When tea is hot, what do we do?" She held it delicately with both hands. "We don't rush. We blow gently. We hold it with care." "Why?" She looked at the atheist. "Because we know that one wrong move, and it burns." The audience leaned in. "So why?" she continued, "when our anger boils, do we not show the same care? Why do we spill harsh words without control, knowing they burn far deeper than tea ever could?" The atheist didn't laugh this time. He simply looked at her. Then at the cup. Then down at his own clenched fists. A sip of tea could wait. But a word, once spilled, never comes back. The atheist adjusted his mic, trying to regain control of the narrative. "We live in a modern world," he said. "Technology keeps us moving, not old beliefs." A low murmur stirred in the audience. Once again, the Muslim girl stepped forward, calm and centered. This time, she held up a smartphone and a charger cable, both simple, both familiar. She looked at the crowd, then at him, and asked, "What happens when your phone runs out of battery?" He raised an eyebrow, unsure. "You rush to charge it." She continued, "Even if it's 1%, you panic. Because deep down, you know it's useless without power." She slowly held the charger up. "This cable, it's your lifeline to connection." She paused, voice steady. "But what about your soul? You wake up every day with 1% peace, 2% purpose. But when was the last time you plugged your heart into something higher? A silence swept through the room. No alerts. No lights. Just a quiet emptiness you pretend isn't there. She gently placed the phone down. Charging a phone takes minutes. But charging a soul, that takes remembrance. The atheist blinked, and for a moment, looked completely disconnected. The atmosphere in the debate hall was shifting, not just minds, but hearts were beginning to open. The atheist tapped the mic and smirked. People set rules and reminders to control others. Religion just adds more. Before the echo of his words could settle, the Muslim girl returned. This time, she placed a small alarm clock on the podium. Tick, tick, tick. I didn't come here to control anyone, she said softly. I came to ask a question. She pointed to the clock. Every night we set alarms. To wake up. To work. To not miss a flight. We trust this tiny machine to make sure we're not late. She looked up at him. But what about the one moment? The most certain of all. When we won't get another morning? The atheist's brow furrowed. But what about the one moment? Which clock warns you? That your time is up forever? The ticking sound seemed louder now. We trust an alarm to wake our bodies, but ignore the warnings that awaken our souls. She gently pressed the clock's button. Beep, beep. A pause. Then silence. The atheist didn't respond. Maybe he finally heard. The sound no one wants to hear too late. The debate hall had gone from skeptical murmurs to silent anticipation. Even the atheist, now seated, seemed more curious than combative. The Muslim girl approached the podium once again, this time holding a small rusted lock in one hand, and a shiny silver key in the other. She raised both for everyone to see. This, she said, holding the lock, is like a human heart. She then lifted the key. And this is what opens it. The atheist tilted his head. You think belief is just a key? She nodded gently. Every lock is built with one key in mind. Try forcing the wrong one, and it will never open. Try ignoring it, and it stays rusted shut. She stepped forward. We try money, distractions, even logic. But the heart stays heavy. Why? She placed the key into the lock. It clicked. Because the heart was designed for remembrance. Not noise. Not ego. Dhikr. That's the key that fits. The lock popped open. A hush fell over the room. Even the atheist couldn't help but watch that simple moment. When something old and sealed, quietly opened. And in that stillness, many wondered if their hearts were locked too. The atmosphere was growing deeper, no longer a battle of words, but a search for something more. The Muslim girl stepped forward again, calm and composed. In her hand, a clear water bottle, half full, beads of condensation glistening under the lights. She held it up. The hall watched in silence. We drink water every day, she said softly. It refreshes us. It keeps our bodies alive. Without it, we weaken, we collapse. The atheist nodded slightly, arms folded, listening. She twisted the cap and took a slow sip. But tell me, she asked, when was the last time you gave your soul a drink? She paused. Then added, the body dries up without water. But the soul, it dries up without meaning. She held up a small pocket Qur'an with her other hand. This is the water for the soul. Every verse. A drop that revives. A word that heals. A stream that flows when life feels dry. The atheist's gaze fell to the floor, as if realizing a thirst he never named. And for a brief second, the debate hall didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like a well. Finally found. The room dimmed slightly as the next moment unfolded, almost as if to match what she was about to say. This time, The Muslim girl walked onto the stage holding a small flashlight. It wasn't turned on, not yet. She stood still, looked at the audience, then at the atheist, and said, "When the lights go out, what do we do?" She clicked the flashlight on, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness. "We reach for this. Not because it changes the world, but because it helps us see, even just a little." She slowly turned in place, letting the beam scan the room. "We're so prepared for physical darkness. But what about the darkness inside? The confusion, the chaos, the questions?" She looked straight at him. "If a flashlight guides you through the dark, then what guides you through life?" She turned the light off. Sudden shadow returned. "We don't sit in a dark room forever. We search for light." "Why not search, when the soul feels blind?" The atheist didn't respond. Because in that moment, the metaphor wasn't just clear. It was visible. There was a hush in the room, not of silence, but of reflection. The Muslim girl returned, holding a pair of perfectly polished black shoes. She gently placed them on the podium. They gleamed under the soft light. She looked around, then down at the shoes. "Every day," she said, "we clean these. We shine them. Protect them. Because people see them." She paused. "No one wants to walk around in dirty shoes, even if they're comfortable. Because how we're seen matters to us." The audience nodded. It was relatable. Then her voice softened. "But what about our intentions? Our thoughts? Our hearts?" She looked directly at the atheist. "We polish what's on our feet. But what about what's inside our chest?" The camera caught his brow froze slightly. She continued. "We step out looking clean, but walk with envy, pride, or arrogance. We wash dirt from leather, but never from the soul." She touched the shoes lightly. "Clean shoes walk the earth, but a clean heart walks toward truth." No one clapped. No one needed to. It wasn't a performance. It was a mirror. The atmosphere had become heavier, not with tension but truth. The Muslim girl returned once more. This time, she carried a folded white shirt and a small box of detergent. She unfolded the shirt slowly in front of the audience. A single visible stain marked its front. "We all wash our clothes," she said gently. "No one wants to walk around with stains." She ran her fingers along the shirt. "Whether it's tea, mud, or sweat, we treat every spot like it matters." She held up the detergent. "We soak, we scrub. We rinse until it's clean." Then, her eyes lifted. "But what about the stains we carry here?" She placed her hand over her heart. "Jealousy. Arrogance. Lies. Who washes those?" A quiet rustle swept the crowd. "We care if a shirt is dirty, but not if our soul is." She folded the shirt again. "Laundry happens every week. Repentance barely once a year. Yet one covers the body, and the other carries us to eternity." The atheist looked down at his sleeves. They were clean. But for the first time, he wondered what he'd been wearing on the inside. A gentle buzz echoed from someone's phone in the audience. The timing was almost poetic. The Muslim girl stepped onto the stage again, this time holding a smartphone in her hand. The screen lit up with notifications. She raised it slowly. "Every few minutes, we check these." A few people in the crowd smiled knowingly. "Whether it's a ping, a pop-up, or a blinking light, we open every message." She scrolled through the screen. "Even if we're busy, even if it's 1 a.m., we reply. We forward. We read." She looked up, voice steady. "But there's another message. From the one who created you. It's been waiting for years." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small Qur'an. No pop-ups. No emojis. Just quiet, divine words that speak to your soul. She gently placed the Qur'an beside the phone. The irony? She said, pausing. We open 100 messages from people, but never the message from God. The atheist stared at his own phone. It vibrated again. But for once, he didn't reach for it. He just listened. The debate had shifted from intellect to insight. This time, the Muslim girl returned carrying a sealed delivery package in her arms, the kind that excited everyone when it arrived at the door. She held it up gently. When we order something online, we wait for it to arrive. She turned to the atheist, who watched with quiet curiosity. We don't know the driver's name. We don't know the exact minute it'll reach. We just trust that it's on the way. She slowly placed the box on the podium. Not once do we doubt that someone, somewhere, is working behind the scenes to deliver. She looked up. And yet, when we ask something from God, we panic if it doesn't come instantly. A pause. We place full faith in an app, but none in the one who delivers without charging delivery fees. Light laughter rippled through the audience. She leaned forward slightly. We order. He delivers. On time. Every time. But only when it's truly ours. The atheist looked at the package, then at his own hands, and wondered how many of his prayers had already been shipped, but were still in transit. The hall had grown quieter with each point, now more of a classroom than a battlefield. The Muslim girl returned once more. This time, she held a small glass jar of salt, plain, unnoticed, ordinary. She held it up for all to see. This, she said, has no color, no scent. But without it, nothing tastes right. She paused, letting the silence build. Salt doesn't scream for attention. It disappears in the dish. But its absence is immediately noticed. The audience nodded. They'd all tasted that kind of blandness before. She continued. Just like that. Faith works quietly. It doesn't always show. But when it's missing, life starts to feel flavorless. The atheist leaned forward, listening. You may have wealth, success, even love, but without Iman, it all starts to feel tasteless. She sprinkled a pinch of salt on her palm. It only takes a little, but that little changes everything. She let the grains fall gently. The room stayed silent, not because they disagreed, but because they all knew the taste of something missing. And the atheist? He sat back slowly, and wondered if the salt in his own life had quietly vanished. The stage lights dimmed slightly as the Muslim girl returned, this time holding a simple, worn-out broom. No fancy props. Just something real. She looked at the audience and said calmly, Every day, we clean our homes. We sweep the floors. We wipe the dust. We scrub the corners no one even sees. She looked at the atheist. Why? Because filth spreads. Because dirt doesn't belong in a space we want to feel peaceful. She slowly swept the floor near the podium once, the soft sound echoing gently. But tell me, if we care so much about external cleanliness. She paused. Why don't we ever sweep our nafs? The words settled like dust in the air. The ego. The jealousy. The arrogance. The anger that builds up in the corners of our soul. She held the broom upright. No one praises the broom. No one puts it on a shelf. But it silently removes what doesn't belong. Her voice softened. We keep our homes clean, but leave our hearts filthy. The atheist looked down, perhaps realizing that no amount of success can clean what the broom of humility was made for. The audience had leaned in now, not for entertainment, but for something they couldn't name. The Muslim girl walked back to center stage. This time, she stood beside a simple, empty chair. She looked at it, then to the crowd. When we enter a room and see a chair like this, empty, she tapped the backrest gently. We notice it instantly. She turned to the atheist. Someone's missing. Something is absent. A vacancy we feel, just by looking. She stepped to the side. But what about the emptiness inside us? Why does no one see that? She placed her hand over her chest. We can point to an empty seat, but not to an empty soul. The hall stilled. People smile, speak, achieve. But deep down, they're carrying chairs, with no one sitting in them. She looked straight at him. You see the outer world clearly, but do you ever look inward and ask who's missing from there? The atheist glanced at the chair, then away, as if afraid to notice the same silence within himself. The hall had become a place of reflection more than rebuttal. The Muslim girl walked back to the podium, holding up a small, silver coin between her fingers. It caught the light as it turned slowly. She began. Every coin has two sides. She held it up for the atheist to see. Front and back. You can't spend it unless you accept both. A few quiet chuckles in the audience. But you, she said gently, you speak only of what can be seen, what can be touched, what is physical, measurable, worldly. She paused. You believe only in the visible side. She flipped the coin. But what about the unseen? The afterlife. The soul. The one who created both sides. She tossed the coin slightly. It spun and landed in her palm. You live as if there's only this world. But what if this is just one side of the coin? She stepped closer. Would you ever throw away money because you couldn't see the back? The atheist said nothing. Because for the first time, he realized truth might be waiting. On the side he never bothered to flip. The lights dimmed slightly, as if to make space for what was coming. The Muslim girl returned to the stage holding a lit candle, its flame steady and soft. She stepped toward the podium, eyes calm, voice gentle. This candle doesn't speak. It doesn't move. But it changes the entire room. She raised it slightly. The flickering light danced across the walls. It burns just to give light. It shortens itself, so others don't stay in darkness. The atheist leaned back, arms crossed, but watching. Every second it melts. It serves. She turned to him. Now tell me, what are you giving to the world? He blinked, caught off guard. You live. You speak. You argue. But are you illuminating anything? Are you just taking space? Or giving light? She looked at the flame. The candle knows it won't last forever. So while it's alive, it gives. A few in the crowd lowered their heads. She ended softly. You call this weak. But I call it purpose. And as the flame flickered once more, the atheist finally saw that real strength sometimes burns quietly. The Muslim girl returned to the stage carrying a small glass bottle of perfume. She gently uncapped it, and a faint but pleasant scent drifted across the room. She smiled softly. We all like to smell good, don't we? Some nodded. Others leaned in. We choose the right fragrance, apply it before we meet others. Because we want to leave a good impression. She looked toward the atheist. But tell me, what happens when your words smell sweet, but your actions reek of pride? The hall stilled. Perfume fades. Character lingers. One disappears in hours. The other stays in hearts. She paused, holding up the bottle. You apply this, so others can sense your presence. But when you walk away, do they remember your kindness? Or just your cologne? She let a drop fall on her wrist. Scent hides what's real. But character? That's what truth smells like. The atheist glanced sideways. perhaps remembering moments where his charm had covered a lack of substance. And as the fragrance lingered in the air, so did the question, "Who are you?" when the perfume fades. The next time she stepped forward, the Muslim girl carried a pair of earphones, their wires loosely tangled, screen light flickering in her hand. "We wear these," she said, lifting them, "to block out the world." The audience knew the feeling, isolating in sound, choosing what to hear and what to ignore. "We choose music, voices, podcasts, noise." She paused, but never silence. She placed the earphones gently on the podium. "You say you're seeking truth," she said to the atheist. "But how can truth reach you when your ears are always full?" The atheist shifted slightly. She continued, "You filter what agrees with you, reject what challenges you. But what if God has been calling all along, and you just never press play?" Silence fell. "We avoid silence because it makes us listen inward, and what we find there scares us." She leaned in, voice soft but piercing. "Disconnect to reconnect. Take them out, and hear what your heart has been trying to say." The atheist didn't respond, but for the first time, his ears felt full. This time, she walked slowly, holding a small block of ice wrapped in a cloth. Droplets slid down her fingers. She placed it on the podium. The atheist stared. "This," she said softly, "is life. It's cold, solid, controlled. You think you have time. You think you can hold on." She opened the cloth slightly. The melting had already begun. "But no matter how tightly you grip it, it melts." She looked directly at him. "That's time. That's youth. That's health." A single drop fell from the ice onto the wooden surface. "We chase the world thinking we'll always have more. But the truth is," she paused, "even while you're standing still, you're losing pieces of yourself." She extended the melting ice toward him. "You won't realize how much has vanished until nothing remains." The atheist's smile faded. He didn't take the ice. She wrapped it again and whispered, "Use it before it disappears." The crowd sat still, as if they, too, could feel something slipping through their fingers. The hall lights flickered slightly. The mood had turned reflective. The Muslim girl returned, this time carrying a laptop. She opened it gently on the podium, and a message appeared. "Potential threat detected." She turned the screen toward the audience. "When this message appears, we don't ignore it. We panic. We run scans. We protect our files." She looked at the atheist. "You know why? Because viruses corrupt what's valuable." She tapped the screen. "And yet, what about the virus here?" She pointed to her chest. "The nafs. The pride. The greed. The desire to prove rather than improve." The atheist raised an eyebrow, unsure where she was going. "We install antivirus software, but not boundaries for the soul." She leaned closer. "You guard your device with passwords and firewalls. But what's protecting your character?" She closed the laptop slowly. "Corruption isn't always digital. Sometimes, it starts with a whisper inside." And as the screen faded to black, so did the illusion that he was completely in control. The Muslim girl returned holding a suitcase, light, modern, ready for a journey. She rolled it to the podium, then paused. "When we travel, we pack carefully. Essentials. Clothes. Papers. Chargers. Even snacks." A few audience members smiled. "Because we know, once the plane takes off, there's no going back." She looked at the atheist. "But tell me, have you packed for that journey?" The atheist tilted his head. "The one where there's no return ticket. No airport. No boarding pass. Just a grave. She gently unzipped the suitcase. It was empty. We prepare so well for vacations, business trips, weekends away. But what about the real departure? She placed a small prayer mat and Qur'an inside. Good deeds. Clean intentions. A heart that remembers. She zipped it up again. Because when that journey begins, this is the only luggage that comes with you. The atheist swallowed hard. Suddenly, he didn't feel ready. The girl returned with a simple wall calendar, dates marked, some crossed out. She held it high. This is how we track time. Deadlines. Holidays. Appointments. Birthdays. She pointed to a red circle. Things we're looking forward to. She crossed out a date. And things we've already lost. The audience was still. She looked at the atheist. You plan your meetings. Your projects. Even your parties. She held up the marker. But who's counting your life? The atheist leaned back, silent. You know how many days till your next trip. But do you know how many days till your last breath? She turned the page. 1 month gone. Every flipped page is a page you'll never live again. She circled the current day. You woke up this morning. But did you thank the one who gave it to you? She gently tore the page off. Because once today is over, it never comes back. And as that paper floated to the floor, it felt like more than just paper. It felt like a reminder of time quietly running out. The Muslim girl stepped forward, this time with a folded blanket and bedsheet in her hands. She gently placed them on a chair, smoothed them, then looked up. Every night, we prepare for sleep. We dim the lights. We fluff the pillows. We turn off distractions. The hall nodded. It was routine. We make sure the room is just right. For a few hours of rest. She paused. But what about the night? That never ends? The atheist looked up still. The night that comes once. And you don't wake up from it. She picked up the folded sheet and held it in front of her. This is what we wrap ourselves in. For comfort. Then softly added. This is also what you'll be wrapped in. For burial. Silence spread. You prepare so carefully for a few hours. But the longest sleep of all? No preparation? She folded the sheet again, slowly. Ask yourself, is your bed made for the night that matters most? The atheist's jaw tensed. And the audience felt it too. This world's sleep was just a practice round. This time, the Muslim girl held up a smartphone, its top corner showing a red X. No signal. She turned it toward the crowd. When we see this, she tapped the icon. We feel disconnected. We panic. We move around. We raise the phone up to the sky. Laughter rippled, they'd all done it. Because without signal, the phone is useless. She looked at the atheist. But what about the signal? Between you and your creator? He blinked. Is that connection active? Is the line even open? She held the phone to her chest. When you're sad, lost, afraid, who do you call? She paused, then continued. We spend all day refreshing Wi-Fi, but never check if our soul is connected. She turned the phone off. Dua is your signal. Not 4G. Not Wi-Fi. Dua. A few heads in the crowd dropped. Phones die when there's no signal. So do hearts. The atheist looked at his own phone. But this time, it didn't feel so smart. She walked slowly this time. A soft white pillow in her arms. She placed it carefully on the podium. We all want a soft place to rest. We want peace, comfort, ease. She pressed her hand into the pillow. It left a gentle impression. This, she said, Helps the head sleep. Then she paused. But what about the heart? The room stilled again. You lie down, in luxury. But inside, you're boiling with lies, guilt, arrogance, pain. She looked up. If your pillow is soft, but your conscience is hard, do you still sleep peacefully? The atheist shifted uncomfortably. She continued. Peace doesn't come from pillows. It comes from purity. She held the pillow close to her. If your deeds aren't soft, your sleep is a lie. She let that line sit in the room, then whispered, and one day, you'll lay your head one last time. Not on this. She tapped the pillow. But on the earth. The atheist's hand rested on his seat. But his eyes were far from rest. This time, the Muslim girl held up a simple notebook and pen, its pages partly filled. She opened it carefully and began. We write everything. To-do lists, dreams, reminders, feelings, even the food we eat. She flipped through the scribbles. Because we don't want to forget. Because paper remembers what we may not. She looked up, eyes steady. But what if I told you? Someone else is writing too? The atheist raised an eyebrow. You're not the only one with a pen. She tapped the cover gently. Every word you speak, every action you take, every intention behind it all. It's being written. A hush fell over the hall. Two angels. One on your right. One on your left. Never distracted. Never tired. She paused. You can tear pages out of this notebook. But not from theirs. She closed the book slowly. We record our stories. But they record our truth. The atheist stared down at his hands, as if wondering what pages were already filled. The girl walked back holding a tablet and a sticky note full of passwords. She smiled gently. We lock everything these days. Phones, laptops, apps, even photo albums. She held up the tablet. Without the right password, nothing opens. She looked to the atheist. You could have the best content inside. But if you forget the key... She tapped the screen. You're locked out. He nodded slightly. The logic was familiar. She held up a new sticky note. But what about this? She wrote one word on it. La ilaha illallah. She placed it next to the tablet. Jannah has gates too. And they don't open with Face ID. The audience chuckled, softly, nervously. This is the password to eternity. Not saved in browsers, but in hearts. She leaned forward. You remember the code to unlock your phone. But what about your soul? She paused. Will you stand before the gate and say, I forgot the password? The atheist looked up. Suddenly, his access felt uncertain. The hall was silent. Even the atheist's eyes were no longer filled with challenge, just thought. The Muslim girl walked forward holding a glass sand timer, slowly dripping grains from top to bottom. She raised it gently. This is time. 1,000 grains, falling one by one. You don't hear it. You barely see it. But it moves, whether you notice or not. She tilted it slightly, the flow sped up. You can't pause it. You can't slow it down. You can't turn it off. She held the timer up to the atheist. Each grain is a moment, a choice, a breath. She whispered. And one day, the final grain falls. The room was still. You make plans for 10 years from now, but can't guarantee 10 seconds. She turned the timer upside down. For one last reset. Allah doesn't ask for perfection. He asks for awareness. The atheist looked down, then up, as if realizing. His sand was falling too. The stage was bare now. Except for a single wooden door, standing upright behind the Muslim girl. She slowly walked toward it, placed her hand on the handle, and looked out at the crowd. "We knock on doors all the time," she began. "For help. For opportunity. For love." She knocked twice. The sound echoed through the hall. "We knock because we hope someone will answer." Then her voice softened. "But what if I told you? This door is already open." The audience leaned in. "This is the door of mercy." She stepped aside. The door creaked, just enough to feel real. "Forgiveness. Peace. Purpose. It's all waiting." She turned to the atheist's voice calm. "Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you think it's too late. Too far. Too hard." She stepped forward again. "But this door never closes. Until your time does." She knocked once more, gently. "And right now, it's still open." The atheist sat frozen, eyes locked on the door. He hadn't moved. But something within him had. The air in the debate hall had changed. It was no longer a hall, it was a battlefield. Not of ideas, but of souls. The atheist sat motionless, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded. He had fired every argument, received every reply. But now, something deeper was unraveling inside him. The Muslim girl stood silent. No words. No motion. Then, slowly, she walked toward the center of the stage. In her hands was nothing but a small, round mirror. Plain. Fragile. Silent. She placed it carefully on the table between them. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from what was about to be shown. She didn't look at him. She looked at the audience. "Throughout this debate, we've talked about the stars, the atoms, the books, the bones, the logic, the science." Her voice echoed softly. "But not once have we talked about you." She turned to him now, her gaze deep, almost painful. "You speak of proof, of what can be seen, measured, tested." She gently turned the mirror toward him. "But what do you see here?" He looked, and saw himself. But for the first time in the entire debate, he didn't like what he saw. His face wasn't victorious. It was pale, tired, empty. She whispered, "You've won arguments before. You've silenced many. But have you ever silenced your own soul?" His eyes blinked rapidly. Something was moving behind them. She stepped closer, still speaking gently. "You asked, where is God? But I ask you, where are you?" She tapped the mirror. "You see your reflection, but not your truth." The crowd leaned forward. A cameraman zoomed in slowly, the mirror now showing both their faces side by side. "One of us believes, and one of us is breaking." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. She continued, voice lowering with gravity. "You say God can't be real because you can't see him. But can you see your pain? Your hope? Your mother's love? Your regrets at night?" Tears began to well in his eyes. "You can't see air, but you breathe it. You can't see time, but it takes everything from you." She turned the mirror upright. "And now, look. What do you really see?" He stared. But this time, he didn't see a face. He saw a boy. From long ago. Curled up on a bed. Asking the ceiling, "Why do I feel so alone?" He saw a teenager. Faking laughter with friends. Wondering what would happen if his heart stopped mid-joke. He saw a man who built a wall of logic just to keep love out. And he saw it behind his own eyes. The soul. Small. Waiting. Still alive. She spoke again, a whisper carried by angels. "You wanted proof of God. But what if he just showed you a mirror instead? He blinked hard. A tear fell. Then another. The camera stayed on him now. He looked up at her. Eyes red. Lips trembling. And in a voice that was not proud. Not rehearsed. Not loud. He whispered, I don't have answers. But I can't deny what I just felt. Not anymore. He looked at the mirror again. Maybe I wasn't looking for God. Maybe I was looking for me. She stepped back. Said nothing. Because in that silence was the loudest answer. The moderator stood. The audience remained still. No claps. No cheers. Just a hall. Full of hearts. Beating in reverence. She stood quietly on stage. Just a 9-year-old girl in a white hijab. Holding nothing but an egg in her small hands. Across from her stood a 60-year-old atheist. Famous for mocking faith. Celebrated for crushing religious scholars in public debates. The crowd laughed. No one believed this little girl could say anything meaningful. But then, she asked just one question, and that question silenced the entire hall. The atheist froze. And for the first time, arrogance had no answer. This wasn't just a debate. This was legacy of Islam. If you want to hear the question that left a proud man speechless, watch till the end. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Islam. Because the truth never hides forever. It only waits for the right voice. The debate hall was packed to the last row. A grand auditorium with glowing chandeliers, velvet curtains, and a hushed audience, all eyes fixed on the stage. The tension in the room wasn't just curiosity. It was disbelief. Because tonight, the famous 60-year-old atheist, Mr. Bernard, known for publicly humiliating religious scholars, wasn't facing a philosopher, an imam, or a sheikh. He was facing a 9-year-old Muslim girl. Some people in the audience still thought it was a joke. A stunt. Her nameplate read, Khadija Hassan, age 9. Dressed in a modest white dress and hijab, she stood with calm eyes and folded hands. Meanwhile, Mr. Bernard sat relaxed, almost amused. The moderator's voice echoed. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's special debate. Does God really exist? Let's begin with opening statements. Mr. Bernard stood first. His posture confident, his tone theatrical. I've debated professors, scientists, monks, and priests. But tonight, he paused with a smirk. I've been paired with a child. A cute one, sure. But let's not waste time pretending this will be fair. Laughter rippled across some parts of the hall. Cameras zoomed in on Khadija's face. She didn't blink. No smile. No nervous glance. Just silence. Mr. Bernard continued. Let's get straight to it. My first question, and I hope you can follow, is simple. How can you believe in a God you've never seen? Isn't belief without proof the same as imagination? The crowd shifted slightly. A few students chuckled. Khadija took a step forward, her voice clear but gentle. Sir, can I ask you something first? Bernard raised an eyebrow. Go ahead. Have you ever felt pain? Obviously. Can you show it to me? Like, literally hand it over? He laughed. No, but... And yet you know it's real. She continued. We feel love, fear, guilt, and thought. They're invisible, but we trust them because we feel their effects. Just like we trust air, though we can't see it. Allah, too, is unseen, but His effects are all around us. The design of our world, the beauty and balance, the order and chaos, all of it points to Him. There was silence. Some heads nodded. Others leaned in. Mr. Bernard adjusted his mic. All right, nice try. Now tell me, if everything is Allah's will, and He controls everything, why do people get blamed for sin? Isn't God the one making it happen? Khadija didn't flinch. Did you choose to be here today? Yes. Did you choose to mock faith in your past speeches? That's my freedom. Exactly, she said. Allah gives us freedom to choose. That's what makes us responsible. Just like a driver is responsible for his crash, even if the car was made by someone else. The crowd stirred again, louder this time. Bernard frowned slightly. I see, he muttered. And what about Satan? Your religion says he's made of fire. Yet Allah will punish him with fire. How can fire hurt fire? Khadija smiled gently. What is your body made of, sir? Excuse me? Your body. What element is it made from? He thought for a second. Carbon. Water. Cells. And if someone strikes you with a bottle of water, will it hurt? Laughter broke out. Then applause. She continued. Just because something is made from an element doesn't mean it's immune to its force. Water drowns water. Fire burns fire. Allah created both the devil and hell, and He alone determines the rules. Mr. Bernard leaned back, momentarily silent. The moderator cleared his throat. We'll now continue with another key question. Bernard jumped back in. One more. If your God is so merciful, then why is there so much suffering? Why do innocent children die? Why do earthquakes destroy homes? What kind of God allows that? The room fell into silence. It was a heavy question, and Khadija took a moment before speaking. This world was never meant to be paradise. The Qur'an says, do you think you will enter heaven without being tested? Tests are not punishments. They're chances to grow. Suffering brings compassion. Hardship reminds us how fragile we are. And sometimes, we simply don't understand Allah's wisdom, just like a child cries at a needle, not realizing the doctor is saving his life. A woman in the crowd wiped her eyes. A man beside her whispered, Subhanallah. Mr. Bernard looked restless now. He shifted, tapped his fingers, then gave a sharp breath. All right. I've heard enough theory. Let's see what else you've got. Khadija reached down to a small bag beside her chair and pulled out a single white egg. Gasps filled the hall. A few people raised eyebrows. Some laughed nervously. Bernard looked baffled. An egg? He said mockingly. We're cooking now? Khadija held the egg gently in her palm and walked forward. This egg is fragile. Inside it is nothing but liquid. No bones. No feathers. No mind. But if left for a few days, it turns into a living bird. With wings. With a brain. With a beating heart. She placed it on the podium slowly. If this simple egg, with no screws, no zipper, no code, can become a living creature, then tell me, how can the universe, galaxies, DNA, and consciousness come from nothing? The silence was thunderous. She spoke again. Design always points to a designer. And creation always points to a creator. Mr. Bernard looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't. The crowd sat frozen. The moderator quietly said, End of round 1. Khadija returned to her seat. The egg still sat there on the podium, a silent witness to a moment the world wouldn't forget. And in that hall, for the first time, faith wasn't just heard, it was felt. The debate hall was no longer laughing. The earlier chuckles and snide remarks had been replaced with silence, awe, and a growing sense of discomfort, mostly on the side of those who had underestimated the little girl in white. Khadija Hassan sat silently as the moderator called for round 2. Her small hands rested calmly in her lap, the egg still sitting on the podium like a quiet, undeniable truth. Mr. Bernard, meanwhile, sipped from a glass of water. His fingers trembled, just slightly, as he placed the glass back down. The moderator announced, We now begin the second round. Mr. Bernard, you may proceed. Bernard forced a tight smile, trying to recover his authority. Very well, he said, clearing his throat. Let's leave fairy tales and bird eggs aside, shall we? He paced slowly. Let's talk about your book, the Qur'an. You claim it is divine. Yet it has verses about war, fighting, conflict. How can a book from a merciful God promote violence? Khadija stood again, her posture composed, voice steady. Sir, even the most peaceful country has an army. Does that mean it loves war? No. It means it defends what is right. The Quran contains verses revealed in the context of self-defense. Muslims were being tortured, killed, driven from their homes. Allah allowed them to fight, not to conquer, but to survive. She stepped closer to the mic. And even in war, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, forbade harming women, children, elders, even animals and trees. That's not violence. That's restraint. That's ethics during chaos. The hall stirred again. A middle-aged man in the front row, who had been frowning all evening, now leaned back thoughtfully. Mr. Bernard waved a hand dismissively. Of course. Every religion says we're peaceful. But let's be honest. Even among Muslims, there's so much disagreement. Sects splits groups. If Islam is so clear, why so many versions? Khadija didn't react to his tone. Difference in opinion doesn't mean confusion. Humans have different levels of understanding. We debate over politics, over medicine, over history, yet we don't throw out democracy, surgery, or textbooks. She smiled softly. Despite differences, all Muslims agree on the oneness of Allah, the prophethood of Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the Quran. The core has never changed. That's not weakness. That's depth. A few students in the crowd began whispering among themselves. One of them murmured, "She's not just answering, she's teaching." Mr. Bernard clenched his jaw. Let's get scientific, shall we? You say your Quran predicted science. That's nonsense. It's a book from the 7th century. Khadija opened her small cloth bag again and pulled out a notepad. She flipped it open. In Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 30, Allah says, "Do not the disbelievers see that the heavens and the earth were once one piece, and we split them apart, and made every living thing from water?" She looked up. That's the Big Bang. And the origin of life, water. Both confirmed by modern science centuries later. Mr. Bernard's lips twitched, but he stayed quiet. Khadija continued. In Surah Al-Mu'minin, the Quran describes the development of the embryo, from a clot to a lump to bones covered with flesh. Scientists in the 20th century confirmed this process using microscopes. How did a man in the desert know that? She walked slowly, gesturing softly. The Quran mentions the protective layers of the atmosphere, the barrier between salt and sweet water, the expansion of the universe. It talks about iron coming from the sky, and now we know iron is not native to Earth. It came from meteorites. She stopped and looked directly at Mr. Bernard. So either Prophet Muhammad guessed these facts, perfectly, without error, or he was divinely guided. The silence in the hall was no longer passive. It was heavy. You could feel the hearts shifting. Mr. Bernard forced a laugh. Coincidence. All books have poetry and guesses. That doesn't make them miracles. Khadija nodded. You're right. Guessing once may be luck. Guessing twice, chance. But consistent, layered accuracy, across centuries, in every field? That's design. She looked at the audience now. The Quran doesn't just ask you to believe. It asks you to test it. In Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 23, if you doubt this book, produce even one chapter like it. For 1,400 years, no one has succeeded. A professor from the university's physics department whispered to his colleague, I've heard that verse. But I never paid attention to the challenge in it. Mr. Bernard tapped the mic again, but his tone was duller now. And yet, even with all these so-called facts, your God stays hidden. He doesn't speak. He doesn't show up. Doesn't that sound like a myth? Khadija replied gently. If a teacher stays silent during a test, does it mean he doesn't exist? Gasps. She continued. Allah is near. But He tests us with silence, with time, with choice, to see who searches, who thinks, who believes not just with eyes, but with heart. Even Mr. Bernard's usual supporters looked uncertain now. The moderator leaned forward. We'll now pause for a short recess before round 3. Applause. This time real. Not sarcastic, not polite, but real. Khadija returned to her seat. She placed the notepad back, then gently lifted the egg from the podium. She stared at it for a second, then smiled to herself. Meanwhile, Mr. Bernard stood stiffly. He didn't glance at her as he walked off stage. From the crowd, someone whispered, She's not just defending Islam. She's making people feel it. Yes. This wasn't just a debate anymore. She picked up the egg, placed it gently back into her bag, and walked off, calm, silent, composed. 10 minutes later, the lights in the debate hall dimmed once more. The crowd was no longer just watching, they were immersed. What began as a scheduled intellectual debate had turned into something deeper. People weren't just hearing words anymore. They were questioning themselves. Mr. Bernard returned to the stage with slower steps this time. He didn't wear the amused smirk from before. His suit was still sharp, but the confidence in his stride had faltered. The man who once silenced entire panels was now adjusting his collar, as if trying to keep himself upright. Khadija Hassan was already standing, her small figure lit by the soft spotlights. The egg no longer sat on the podium, but its memory echoed in every mind. The moderator announced, Round 3 begins now. Mr. Bernard, you may proceed. He exhaled through his nose, gripping the sides of his podium. Miss Khadija. He paused. You are clearly articulate, I'll admit. But I have one more question for you. She nodded silently. Mr. Bernard continued. You claim God exists and guides life. But tell me, if humans were truly created by a wise, perfect being, why are we born weak? Needy? Confused? Why don't we remember our purpose clearly? Why all this struggle? Khadija didn't blink. Because the journey is the purpose. She walked forward slowly. When a child is born, he doesn't know how to speak or walk. But he learns. The struggle to learn, the hunger to find, that's what makes truth valuable. If Allah gave us all answers from birth, we'd be robots, not seekers. She paused, scanning the audience. Even gold has to be dug. Diamonds form under pressure. Seeds grow in darkness. Weakness is not a flaw, it's a test. And remembering God, rediscovering purpose, that's how our souls awaken. Mr. Bernard pressed on. But why such a painful path? Why death, disease, heartbreak, disasters? Why would a merciful God allow that? Khadija's tone softened, but her words stayed firm. Sir, when you see someone drowning, do you blame the water or do you jump in to help? Bernard furrowed his brow. That's a strange question. She continued. Allah doesn't promise a life without pain. He promises meaning within the pain. He commands us to help, to heal, to be the hands that rescue others. That's why suffering exists, not to break us, but to reveal who we become when we respond to it. Several people in the audience had tears in their eyes now. A woman held her chest. A student dropped his pen and didn't bother picking it up. Mr. Bernard stepped back. His face was unreadable now. Khadija turned slightly and added, And what if all this pain is a mercy in disguise? What if this temporary world is just a waiting room for eternity? What if Allah, in His wisdom, uses our losses here to give us far more there? The silence was overwhelming. Mr. Bernard finally spoke again. So we live, we struggle, we worship, and then we die. And you say there's a hereafter. But how can you prove it? Khadija looked up. Do you remember your birth? He raised an eyebrow. Of course not. And yet you believe you were born? The audience chuckled softly. She continued, not remembering something doesn't mean it didn't happen. The hereafter is not a myth. It is the completion of justice, where every tear, every effort, every prayer will find its answer. The Qur'an says, every soul shall taste death, and to your Lord is the return. We were created not to vanish, but to return. Mr. Bernard looked down. His hands were trembling slightly now, gripping the podium. He was silent. Khadija gently added, Sir, may I ask you something now? He nodded, without his usual sharpness. If you're right, and there is no God, no soul, no afterlife, then after death, I lose nothing. I lived with hope, with peace, with purpose. But if I'm right, and Allah is real, and life has meaning, and the day of judgment awaits, then what will you lose? The crowd collectively held its breath. She said it slowly, with care. You'll lose everything. Mr. Bernard opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Khadija returned to her seat without looking back. The moderator's voice came through, lower this time. We will take a short break before our final round. The crowd didn't move. Many were frozen. Some were visibly shaken. Phones were in hands not for photos, but to take notes, to text loved ones, to say, you need to watch this. Backstage, Mr. Bernard sat quietly on a chair, his hand covering part of his face. An assistant offered him water, but he didn't take it. He just stared into the ground, lost in something deeper than thought. In a corner, Khadija Hassan sat beside her bag, whispering quietly, her lips moving in dhikr. Her eyes were calm. There was no pride on her face, only serenity. This wasn't about winning anymore. This was about waking people up. And in that hall, for the first time, faith wasn't just heard, it was felt. The hall was dimly lit now. The energy had shifted. What began as an intellectual showdown had turned into something that neither side had prepared for, a confrontation with truth. Not a truth built on argument, but one built on stillness, fitra, and the ache of the soul. Mr. Bernard slowly returned to the stage. His stride had lost all showmanship. Gone were the grand gestures, the smirks, and the subtle jabs. He looked older now, not in age, but in weariness. The weight of the conversation had pressed down on him. Khadija Hassan stood up from her chair and walked calmly to the podium once again. The egg from earlier was gone, but its symbolism lingered, fragile, yet undeniable. The moderator didn't even bother with ceremony. Mr. Bernard, you may speak. He didn't look up right away. Then finally he said, I want to ask a question, but not to win. He paused. I just want to understand something. Khadija nodded once. He looked at her, his voice low. If God is real, and He created everything, then why doesn't He just appear? Why remain invisible? Why not show Himself clearly to all? Khadija took a breath. Because faith without choice is control. And Allah wants love, not robots. She walked closer to her mic. Sir, when a teacher gives a test, does he speak during the test? Bernard blinked. No, he stays silent. And yet the students still write, still solve, still try, because they know the teacher is there. Watching. Waiting. Grading. She looked at him gently. Allah's silence is not absence. It's a space He gives us to choose, to believe not with force, but from the heart. Bernard gripped the podium again. But I've lived my whole life without feeling God. Not once. Just silence. Emptiness. Khadija tilted her head. May I ask something? He nodded. When you're in pain, really deep pain, where does your hand go, instinctively? He frowned. I don't know. Up, maybe, she said softly. Exactly. We look up. We raise our hands. We cry out, even if we don't believe. Why? Who are we calling? The hall was still. Every person knew that feeling, That moment of helplessness where, despite logic, they called out to the sky. That cry, she said, is proof. Because even your heart knows there's someone higher. Even your soul doesn't believe your own denial. Mr. Bernard lowered his eyes. Khadijah's voice lowered too. You say you never felt him, but you did. Every time you were in awe of a sunset. Every time your heart trembled with fear or love. Every time your conscience whispered that something was right or wrong. That was him, speaking to your Fitra. She paused. The problem is, people aren't really atheists. They just bury the voice too deep under noise, pride, and pain. Mr. Bernard looked as if he were staring at his past. The man who once stood confidently on global platforms now looked like someone trying to listen to something he'd been ignoring for decades. He tried to speak. But how do you know that voice is from God and not just emotion? Khadijah smiled softly. Because it speaks even when emotion doesn't. And because every soul, no matter what culture, what language, feels wrong when it lies, and peace when it prays. That kind of universality doesn't come from DNA. It comes from design. The audience was still, not in awe of her age anymore, but of her clarity. One elderly woman in the audience whispered, She speaks like her soul remembers something we've all forgotten. Mr. Bernard let out a shaky breath. You're saying, God was never far. I just never looked in the right place? Khadijah nodded. The Qur'an says, we are closer to him than his jugular vein. Allah isn't distant. We are. She stepped forward, voice deepening slightly. Sir, you spent your life searching the galaxies, reading the philosophers, mastering the sciences, but you forgot to look inside. She tapped her chest. Right here. Mr. Bernard stood silently. He was trembling now, whether in confusion or realization, no one could say. But the battle was no longer between two people. It was now between a soul and its past. The moderator didn't interrupt. He knew something rare was happening. Khadijah looked around the hall. This isn't just about one man's journey. It's all of ours. We bury our hearts under success, reputation, distraction, but one whisper from truth, and the soul remembers. She raised her eyes once more. That's why the Qur'an doesn't just argue with minds. It calls hearts. Mr. Bernard turned away from the mic slightly, wiped the corner of his eye, then walked back to his seat in silence. Khadijah remained standing, her hands calmly folded. The egg had shaken logic. But this shook the soul. And as the lights dimmed for the final break before the last round, there was no noise in the room. Just hearts. Beating. And remembering. When the lights returned, the atmosphere was completely different. The debate was no longer a spectacle. It felt like a sermon, a therapy session, a spiritual awakening all in one. Some people in the audience had stopped taking notes. They were simply absorbing. Quiet. Reflective. Khadijah Hassan stood once more behind her podium. She didn't look tired, though the intensity of the discussion would have overwhelmed most adults. She stood there like a calm flame, unshaken, steady, and full of warmth. Mr. Bernard returned slowly. No arrogance now. Just thoughtfulness. His hand stayed on the edge of the podium for a while. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't booming anymore. I used to think faith was just a fairy tale. A way for weak people to feel better. But now, he paused. You've forced me to admit something. I don't have all the answers either. There was a deep silence. He looked at her with eyes that weren't attacking now, they were searching. Khadijah, you've spoken about science, logic, pain, the heart. But I want to ask about something else. She nodded. He leaned forward slightly. If Islam is really the truth, why haven't more people accepted it? Why doesn't it dominate the world? If God's message is so clear, why is it so ignored? Khadijah replied, her voice steady. Because truth doesn't shout. It whispers. And most people aren't listening. She took a deep breath. Islam doesn't spread through force. It spreads through sincerity. Through one person living righteously. Through one heart changing. That's how the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, changed the world, not by conquering minds, but by touching hearts. She looked out toward the audience. The truth is often ignored not because it's weak, but because it demands change. And people fear change more than falsehood. Mr. Bernard folded his arms, then dropped them again. But religions, they cause wars. Division. Hatred. Khadija responded instantly. So do ideologies. So do flags. Even football teams. It's not religion that causes war, it's ego. Pride. Power. Islam, at its core, says, no racism, no tribalism, no superiority, only taqwa, righteousness, makes you better. She quoted calmly. The Qur'an says, we made you into nations and tribes so that you may know one another, not despise each other. There were murmurs in the audience. A history professor sitting in the third row slowly nodded. Mr. Bernard tried once more. And this book of yours, the Qur'an, you claim it is unchanged, divine, protected. But can you prove it? People have tampered with texts for centuries. Khadija smiled. The Qur'an is not like any other book. It has never been edited, updated, or revised. Millions have memorized it, cover to cover. From the deserts of Mauritania to the mountains of Pakistan. Not one letter differs. She added, even the enemies of Islam admit that the Qur'an's preservation is unmatched. That's not just protection, that's prophecy fulfilled. Mr. Bernard remained quiet. Khadija's tone shifted slightly, becoming more direct. But the real miracle of the Qur'an isn't just in its preservation. It's in its challenge. He raised an eyebrow. She opened a small folded paper from her podium and read. And if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our servant, then produce a chapter like it, and call your witnesses besides Allah, if you are truthful. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 23. She looked up. That challenge stands for 1,400 years. Not one person, not one group, has been able to produce something like it in depth, rhythm, message, and spiritual impact. She stepped forward slightly. That's not poetry. That's power. Mr. Bernard's lips pressed together. He didn't argue. Khadija continued. You asked why people don't accept it? Because the Qur'an doesn't beg. It stands. Quietly. Powerfully. And waits for hearts to open. Then she paused, and looked him in the eyes. Is yours open now? The hall gasped silently. Mr. Bernard swallowed. She added softer now. This isn't about winning. I don't want to defeat you, Mr. Bernard. I want you to see what I see. Feel what I feel when I say La ilaha illallah. That nothing, not fear, not doubt, not pain, is greater than Allah. The atheist closed his eyes. And for a moment, he looked like a man caught in two worlds. Then he spoke. What you just said. Nothing is greater than Allah, it feels. He hesitated. She helped him. It feels like home. He looked at her deeply. Then slowly nodded. Yes. The crowd didn't erupt. They didn't need to. The stillness was louder than applause. Khadija folded the paper in her hand, gently. The Qur'an is not a book of rules. It's a conversation. Between the Creator and your soul. She turned back to the podium, gently placing the folded paper beside the egg from earlier, as if placing two seeds of truth side by side. Mr. Bernard didn't leave the stage. He stood quietly, hands trembling slightly, breathing deeply, like a man catching his breath after a long swim through doubt. And the people watched, not a debate anymore, but a dawning. The Qur'an was not being defended. It was being lived. It was being witnessed. The final round never really began. Because what had taken place moments ago was no longer a debate. It had turned into something far deeper, a silent tug-of-war between ego and truth, reason and revelation, arrogance and submission. Mr. Bernard remained on stage, no longer the titan of logic and argument. His posture wasn't hunched in defeat, it was softened in realization. The expression on his face had changed. Not one of loss, but of awakening. Khadija Hassan stood quietly, watching him. She had no victory to claim. She never raised her voice, never gloated, never pushed. Her strength had come from a place beyond experience or education, it had come from truth. The moderator stepped forward hesitantly. "Do you wish to continue with closing statements?" Mr. Bernard slowly raised his hand. "No. I have nothing more to say in opposition." The room was frozen. He turned toward Khadija. "But may I ask for something?" She nodded. He looked down, his voice cracking for the first time. "I've lived 60 years. I've read thousands of books. Debated hundreds of people. But I've never heard the truth sound like that." He took a deep breath. "I don't want to argue anymore. I want to know what it means to return. To come back to the one I've denied for so long." Gasps echoed softly through the crowd. Khadija stepped forward, her eyes warm but firm. "Returning to Allah begins with a word. But not just a word, a surrender. A witness. From the heart." Mr. Bernard slowly walked toward her, trembling. She looked into his eyes. "Repeat after me, if your heart is ready." He nodded. "It is." And then, with hundreds watching, and thousands more watching through live-stream screens, Mr. Bernard slowly spoke. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." His voice cracked on the final word. And with that, decades of pride collapsed in a single moment of humility. The audience stood. Not in celebration, but in still silence. In awe. A professor wept. A student dropped to sajda at the back of the hall. The cameraman zoomed in, tears in his own eyes. Even the moderator stood still, unable to speak. Khadija gently smiled. "Welcome to peace." Bernard, now Brother Bernard, closed his eyes, as if finally letting go of a weight he had carried far too long. Someone brought him a chair. He sat down, holding his face in his hands. But this time, not from shame. From relief. And Khadija turned toward the crowd one last time. "I didn't come here to win. I came to remind. Islam isn't about age or titles or arguments. It's about the soul, your soul, remembering its creator." She stepped away from the podium. And as she walked back across the stage, the egg still sat there, quietly, like a sign. From something fragile, life had been born. From something small, something eternal had been awakened. That night, the world didn't just watch a child debate an atheist. They watched a soul come back to life. And they witnessed not the collapse of a belief, but the rise of something far greater. The legacy of Islam.